Is Megan Levy's. I'm an author and illustrator from Tacoma. I've been published in all sorts of places, from the Iowa Review to Cast of Wonders, most recently with the Underland Arcana Press, and my debut novella, 100,000 Lives After Death, is what I will be reading from today. There are copies of it in the bookstore downstairs. And I don't know if you guys have read like the sentence that I put down, but it's about a woman who is made of 100,000 spiders after she died 10 years ago. So I'm just going to start with prologue. The wife, Tilly Wright, was in the garden. Her many fangs chewed through stems that would taste grassy and bright if she still had a living tongue. Flowers dropped neatly down to her hundreds of outstretched and waiting claws. It was a joyful task on a brilliant spring afternoon, and she marched her bouquet happily through the open kitchen door on the procession of spiders that carried her soul as easily as they carried flowers. The artist, Tilly Wright, was at a retreat 127 miles away, with the effervescent Newbery Award nominee, E. Leilani Liu. She sketched alongside her, sitting in companionable silence at the shore of the Columbia River, as 1,000 minuscule spiders operated her hand with ease. The bones she designed and printed in resin made her disguise perfect, and so long as she stayed out of the water, no one at the retreat would ever guess the human had died over 10 years ago. The hunger, which had no name, was in the forest. It was building bodies, many bodies, some occupied, most not. No matter where else Tilly was, the hunger was always hungry, and it was always in the forest. Part 1, The Wife. I also did illustrations for it, so that's me. Ivan still had his headset on when Tilly surrounded his desk in a carpet of flowers. He looked away from his computer screen and swept his eyes over the floor, then the room, until he found one of the older spiders lounging on a shelf between a few dusty workplace awards. None of the spiders could claim to be any more Tilly than the rest, but Ivan preferred to address the elders when he could. They were big enough to afford him some eye contact. He would never admit it aloud, but he sometimes missed the days when she had only 2 eyes, when he didn't have to choose which of her thousands to focus on. Noon already? He asked. The spider stood and bobbed its head up and down, and then scuttled down the wall to join the carpet of flowers that was flowing out of the room and down the stairs. He smiled and set his headset back on, just long enough to finish off his meeting with a round of pleasantries. Downstairs, Tilly had misjudged the capacity of her vase by a wide margin. She buried some of the lesser-used mugs out on strands of spider silk and cut the excess flowers into multiple miniature bouquets. But there were still too many flowers. Perhaps she'd make a wreath for every door in the house. The floor creaked overhead with Ivan's footsteps, and she gathered her body from its space in the closet, the bones of the woman who died 10 years ago. She and Ivan had perfected some things in the time since her spiders had devoured the last of her flesh. They'd fitted the skull with a silicone tongue and soft palate which allowed her to mimic the sound of the voice that died with the body. She'd packed dense cobweb beneath her silken skin to give Ivan something soft to hold. A mask, a perfect mimicry of the face she once had, with fine-tuned lift and pulleys embedded within, allowed a team of spiders to make expressions at a pace which only lagged imperceptibly behind the emotions she felt. It was so near to being human that she hardly missed it anymore. Although she never did manage to get the hang of legs, she'd placed those in a box and tucked them away in the attic on the bottom of the dusty bookshelf. Boxes of model trains were stacked on top, and the legs were only acknowledged when she and Ivan needed to change the diorama from passenger cars to freight. Any thought for the legs passed quickly as the trains were tucked back into their boxes. Her hands were always working, even when the body was at rest. She kept them in the studio, disembodied puppets that could paint whenever it came to mind for the team that controlled them. At the moment, they were keyed to the artist 127 miles away, and they copied the movement of her plastic hands with such precision that the paper they painted would have been an exact replica of hers if only the studio's greens would behave. The artist had the benefit of new paints, but the hands in her studio were making do with old and overmixed. The spiders that made the wife swarmed up within the body she kept in the closet. They filled their stations and animated the thing to near life as a horde of them carried her out the closet door to greet Ivan at the bottom of the stairs. "Are those zinnias?" he asked of the mug of flowers trundling up the stairs on the backs of multiple spiders. He rubbed his eyes and patted his pockets. His computer readers were pushing back his thinning hair, and a spider raced down the banister with his day glasses held up to meet his hand. He adjusted them over his nose with a murmured thank you as another spider swept the readers from his head and scuttled off to set them back in their case. She pressed a laugh through painted lips and shook the skull no. The zinnias wouldn't be in bloom for months. Spiders worked the bellows of her woven lungs, pressed silicon-tongued teeth, and started up her voice. Daisies mostly, a couple crocus, and a few sprigs of onion. Ivan thought any flower that wasn't a rose might be a zinnia. Ivan took her delicate shoulders, drew her near, and kissed the mask's cheek. "Onion! We'll have bouquets for dinner." He laughed as she pulled a face. "I don't have any more tickets lined up for today. Why don't I take the afternoon off and we put on a movie?" "Are you sure they don't need you?" she asked. Ivan had some kind of consulting job with computers, and though he often spoke of his work, his clients and capabilities were as mysterious to her as the magic that kept her consciousness alive. He shook his head. "I thought we could have some time together. Something low impact. I know you're at the retreat right now, too." She nodded. Tilly had lost count of how many minds belonged to her after reaching 100,000 spiders. It was far too many for a single consciousness to hold them, and so she turned her focus to art, to living, and to life with her sweet husband. The house spiders lived with Ivan, the hens handled painting, the plastic body handled friends. The rest were unthinkable, unmanageable, and so she did not think of them and let them manage themselves. "Whatever you want, honey," she answered. "A movie sounds nice." On the shore of the Columbia River, where it opens its mouth wide to the yawning Pacific, and its waters mixed with salt, Ile Lonilu asked the artist Tilly Wright if she'd want to do this again. This, 12 close friends who'd never met in person before last week, each of them artists, 5 watercolors, 3 ink, 2 gouache, 2 charcoal. A small collection of cabins overlooking the water, resources pooled and distributed to accommodate everyone's needs, a chance to grow in one's art and forget the troubles of home for a week. "We haven't even finished the first one," Tilly answered with a cheeky smile. Her hands were painting the waves lapping against the shore as lovingly as she could manage, but it was hard to feel much affection for something that would destroy her body and drown her spiders if she happened to fall in. Still, the book she was meant to illustrate was set on the ocean, and she wanted to do right by the waves. She could never get the picture right until she found something to love in it. Ilelani Lu laughed at the dumb little joke, and Tilly smiled wide because she loved to hear the woman laugh, and because Tilly and Ivan had spent so much time perfecting her teeth that it would be a shame not to smile. The first batch had been inhumanly white when Ivan printed them in plastic, and they'd melted a little in the afternoon sun when Tilly forgot to move them from the window. It took 3 rounds with the printer to get the color right, and another 10 to find the balance of fleshy red gums to set them in. She wished she could show Leilani the lovely opalescent shade of pearl pink she'd chosen for her skull, but it was impossible to bring out the color of one's bones without admitting the soft mask of one's face covered a multitude of spiders. And so she turned back to her painting and daubed some white in where light would show through the green water. Terrible. It looked even worse than before. Maybe she was not meant to love the ocean. Leilani coughed next to her, reminding Tilly that they'd been talking. "You're always good with the newer artists online. Do you want to take on an instructor role if we made it a formal event next year?" "Oh!" Leaving the house at all was so difficult. The retreat took almost a year of planning. But Leilani Lu was such a gracious host, friendly and accommodating. Tilly was not the only artist in their group who used a wheelchair, and Leilani herself sometimes used a cane. Although the cabins were small and oddly shaped, rising from the mossy ground like cedarwood origami, the paths were paved, and the ramps were well built. A wheelchair was ideal for Tilly's disguise, but she still worried she might slip. 10 years of playing human, and the spiders had still never managed to work the legs. It was easy for her to move outside the body, to split herself into a swarm, and carry whatever piece of her soul wished to go, wherever it wished to be. And while it would be a simple task to swarm and carry her hands down to the edge of the surf, where they could make portraits of the little rock crabs that waved at her from afar, it would surely terrify her friends. Being able to split one's whims between swarms of spiders and carry out all of them simultaneously made a lot of things easy, but it did make finding friends exceptionally difficult. She had to relearn friendship after she died. The illness that had killed her worked slowly. It first stripped her down to a husk, and as it stole from her life, her world became small. Friends fell away as the places she once belonged to became out of reach, until it was only Ivan and herself and Ivan's broken heart, because he knew she would leave him behind. But Tilly survived her death. It was not a pretty survival. She'd hidden it as best she could, but Ivan found out eventually. And in a miracle that she still did not understand, he hadn't run away. He'd listened and he'd stayed. And when they got a bit of money, him with a better job and her with more and more commissions, they both moved out of the city to a little house on the edge of a wild forest, where she did not have to hide away inside their home, where she could abscond to the forest and feel the sun again. It was Tilly's sister who allowed her to survive her death. Mavis was a witch. She did what she could, but Mavis left as soon as she'd solved the problem of death, and she never returned. Tilly got on. She sold illustrations. She practiced friendship on artist forums. She got invited to smaller chat rooms which turned to private talks late at night with friends across the world. Eventually, they started to talk of meeting up, and Tilly had spoken to Ivan about the logistics of creating a better body that would allow her to live again amongst the living. It was lonely still to be without a family, but her sister had been gone for so long that the ache was familiar. A hole where a tooth should be, where the tongue would come to rest. She could live with the ache. When spread across 100,000 bodies, she could hardly feel the ache at all. The wife turned to Ivan with a grin as she relayed the artist's conversation. "She's asking if I want to be an instructor next year." Ivan brightened and raised his hands in victory. Tilly squirmed with joy. "I think I have a professional crush." He laughed. "On Leilani Liu, you sing her whole name every time she's mentioned." Tilly wheezed a little laugh through papery lungs and knocked her shoulder against his. "She does the prettiest, fluffiest moths in charcoal, and they're so expressive. She still has some of the originals from her first book, and I'm buying one the moment my check from that magazine clears." "Maybe we could hang it in the kitchen," said Ivan. His hands stroked absently, fondly over one of her oldest spiders. It was as large as a baseball, fuzzed over like a kiwi, with legs as thick as Ivan's fingers. Her mind briefly went into it, and she pushed herself into his hand, scraped her fangs softly against the pad of his thumb, and the affection spread out through her network of spiders like honey on hot toast, golden and sweet. "Were I the moth-eating type," he mused, "I think Miss Lou's would look pretty appetizing." Tilly pulled the mask of her face into an exaggerated grimace and stuck out her tongue. "They're so dry, honey. They're better as caterpillars." He hummed thoughtfully and went to the kitchen. "Do we have caterpillars in the shed right now, or just crickets?" he asked. "Just crickets." The nursery shed in the backyard was filled with boxes of them, separated by age so the adults wouldn't gobble up the tasty little grubs that couldn't run or fight. She needed to rotate them soon, or the eggs that had sifted down through the mesh would hatch outside her boxes. It was little trouble to catch larvae. They were slow and deliciously easy to devour, but then she'd have to start over with breeding insects, and she didn't want to waste another $1,000 when she was also saving up for a fluffy moth and charcoal. And it wouldn't do to go hungry. She was always hungry. She'd lost track of how many mouths she had to feed. There were no naturally occurring insects nearby anymore. No birds, or rats, or squirrels, or deer. "Are you hungry?" she asked when she remembered that Ivan was standing in the kitchen, waiting for an answer. She kept dropping conversations while her mind was in the forest, at the sea, in the studio, everywhere else. She had to focus, here, with him. "I could eat. I'm making popcorn and we're watching a movie. I could dust it with cricket flour if you're interested." "I'll share some popcorn," she said, pulling the mask over her polished skull into a pleasant smile. He frowned slightly, like she'd done something wrong. "Your hands are missing." Her hands were in the studio, suspended in silk, disembodied and unbothered by the weight of humanity, as they echoed the movement of her brushstrokes 100 miles away. They're painting. Ivan sighed, disappointed. You have a whole other body that's already painting at the coast. You're spread too thin. If you need to go dormant here so you can focus there, please, go. He blew a kiss to the body on the couch, then scratched the head of a spider on the counter. I mean, I love having you, but you should be with your friends. It's fine, the hands are just copying what the retreat body is doing. It's barely a thought. He shook his head, and put the popcorn back on the shelf. No movie. Go, paint your oceans. I'm fine, Ivan. When you don't have to worry about operating legs. Sweetheart, I do not think about my legs that much. Nobody thinks about their legs as much as you think they do. Well, yes, but your body works all over without you having to think about it. He suddenly looked so sad until he dropped the fight. The problem with storing one's soul in a multitude of spiders is that the soul can very quickly outgrow them. Spiders are small, their little minds only carry so much. Each experience needed a place to go, and when Tilly ran into the ceiling of her many minds, she found it was little trouble to create more of them. So she did. She laid eggs, she hatched, she had space again for more memory, more soul, more and more and more. And Ivan thought it was wonderful that she never forgot a thing, that she had perfect recall of every moment of her life from the moment she returned from the dead. And if he was a little sad when she could not recall something from before, some moment when she was still human, a first date at a soda fountain, a hat she made with snowflakes knit around the band, he was very good at hiding it. If her eyes hadn't numbered in the thousands, if they were not always watching from countless angles, attuned to the tiniest quake of movement, she would not have seen his sorrow. And he didn't speak of it, and neither did she. And they were happy, because every happy person is a little sad sometimes. I'll fetch my hams. The strands holding them snapped as quickly as a thought. They marched into the kitchen and waved their fingers at him until his face lifted up a little, then neatly climbed her body to reattach the wires, reattach at the wrists. There. She waggled her hands to test the hold, then twisted them around to frame her face and make goggles of her fingers. Now we can watch a movie. She grinned. He nodded with pursed lips, unamused by her antics. You worry me sometimes. She dropped her hands away and pulled him close. You don't need to worry about me, she whispered, and squeezed her hand around his arm. She never wanted him to worry about her. She was not an easy creature to love. All her bodies, all her hungry mouths, all her wretched little thoughts that she banished to the forest when she could not bear to keep them in the house. He didn't need to know about the hunger, and she didn't need to think of it. She thought of her friends at the river, her painting hands, her perfect husband, all while the claws in the forest were building and building and building, and she was watching a movie on the couch. Something animated, well past the opening scene. How long have they been watching this movie? I'm fine, Ivan, I promise. He looked at her oddly. He hadn't said anything to provoke that response. Who was she responding to? The doorbell chimed. He kissed her head. He went to answer the door until he was alone. Are we out on time?
10 to 3.
You got like 5 minutes.
5 more
7
minutes? Okay, I think I can get through one more little passage here. You don't have to answer right away. You have a year to think on it. Tilly remembered suddenly that Ileilani Lu was watching her patiently. Her hands were moving without thought, the spiders that worked beneath her silken skin, pulling the strands inside her fingers to move her paintbrush neatly across the page. I couldn't commit to anything yet, she said. The smile she wore did not match her thoughts. She wanted to say yes. She'd gone a decade without being seen by anyone but Ivan, and she was unwilling to give that up. People liked her here. People were kind. I want to. Leilani reached out to her until he forced herself to be still, to not draw away. Leilani took her hand, woven tendons and plastic bones beneath soft silk skin. And yes, it was magic that kept the woman from knowing the horrors that animated Tilly's body. Her sister's spellwork kept Tilly spinning in this facsimile of life, but it was more than that. It was a miracle that she could be touched and still cared for. Then we'll make it happen, said Ileilani Lu. Her lovely dark eyes crinkled at that, and she patted Tilly on the shoulder. You should get inside, though. Your hands are freezing. She should get inside. She should focus on this place, in this body that she built for it, not on a distant doorbell ringing, still ringing, frantically, even though it hardly ever rang. There shouldn't be any company until Sunday. Is it lunch already? Asked Tilly. Lunch was inside. She'd been eating privately in her cabin, while the others cavorted in the dining room hall. She tried to eat quickly, swarming out of the skin to devour what was offered. Yesterday was a lovely falafel, good texture. She wished she could have commented on it to her friends, but it was long past time for that when she rejoined them, and she couldn't have them asking her to join them for the next meal. She didn't want to keep saying no to the things that she wanted. Lunch isn't until 1. Are you still eating in your cabin? Always, Tilly forced a light chuckle. Maybe I'm a touch off. I think I need to lie down. Can I leave my paper here? Of course, said Leilani. Tilly closed her paint box and slipped it into the case she'd mounted on the back of her chair. In her haste to leave, she left a paintbrush lying on her paper. It rolled down the page and dotted her skirt with green before clattering to the ground, thankfully missing Leilani's canvas by an inch. Tilly didn't think to apologize until she was nearly to the cabin. She gripped her wheels, slowed from the frantic pace that she'd taken, and pressed a practiced breath through silken lungs. She was losing focus. She was elsewhere, and frightened. Why was she frightened? All right, and that's that. Yeah. All right, I think I'm just gonna pack up if anyone wants to say anything. I have Native Spiders ribbons up here. I also have postcards with links to where you can purchase a book, and then I also have books downstairs in the book nook. Okay. Thank you.